Hi guys, it is Monday and welcome to Art. I am not here this week. I am taking the week off because I worked all the way through the summer and then the fire happened and then I've been working the fire and then when school started I started working at school. So I'm taking the week off in summation. So, in terms of where you guys are at, by now you should have your shading drawings in, your value drawings. That is one drawing of each object shaded in. One thing I'll say is you need to make sure that there are different tonal values on it. Don't just make the object gray. That's not the point. So if you don't understand that, please go back and watch the video from class. I want you to have a highlighted area that goes to dark and then to shadow. So let me show you an example of that real quick. Just use this one. I think maybe one of you guys has turned it in. The other thing I'll tell you while I load this up is that your guys's you guys watching this video is going to be what you are getting for your attendance credit for this class this week. So I'm using Edpuzzle, which means that you are going to be watching the video and it tells me if you watch the video all the way through or not. So that being said, let me find a good example here. I believe this is from the other class. Probably should have had this loaded. Here we go. So here's a drawing that one of your classmates did. So as you can see, she's even drawn where the light source is, and then it's lighter here, it gets darker, and then there's a shadow at this end, and then there is the shadow behind the actual object. This is what I'm looking for in terms of what you are turning in. So when it comes to grading criteria, it's not so much about did you draw the shape correctly, it's did you shade it using tonal values. So make sure, so here again we have a lighter side, a little bit darker, darkest side, and then a shadow. Please make sure that this is the stuff that's showing up. So after you've done the 4 individual objects, the last drawing that you are supposed to be turning in is the drawing of all 4 objects together in a still life. So those are either done on individual paper or you can do the individual objects with more than one on each paper. But then I still want one drawing of all the elements together. Again, here's the highlighted spot, it gets darker, darkest, and it creates the form and then the shadow. So this is what I want to see in your work. This is what you're being graded on. If you pull off the shapes exactly, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for if you understand how to add tonal value. So that's what you guys need to be turning in. And I'm going to begin to introduce our new topic, which is drawing and from form and volume. So when it comes to form, this is actually a very important topic when it comes to usually the type of art that you guys are the most interested in. So I'm going to switch here to a page. I'll move my image over here. So here we have some sketching done for SpongeBob SquarePants. So in these drawings, we have the form of the characters. So Plankton seems to be kind of this bean shape, and that bean shape can change because, of course, he's a cartoon. But there's this ratio of where his eye is, where his eye appears, that all kind of goes into his form. And then we have Mr. Krabs, and he is sort of this sort of triangular egg. So he's round, but he's also kind of triangular, and they use lines to kind of show the shape of him. And as you kind of get to know your favorite characters in terms of the way they are drawn, you'll begin to see that they have these forms and shapes that they are kind of being worked into. So SpongeBob is kind of this prism shape that can bend, and then his face has proportions to it that they try and keep, as well as SpongeBob. But all of these lines are to create his form, and for a good animation, that form has to stay kind of the same throughout. So over here we have Mr. Krabs again, and they've really drawn out, he's kind of a candy corn, and they've used lines to say this is really his form. This is the form of him. Then we add the tiny little legs and the huge eyes and then his arms. And even when it comes to this hat, they're saying this is the form of the hat. It's a tube that we've added a round end or a dome on, and we've added a flap. So this is the form. So this plays a lot into animation. Not only does it play into 2D animation, it plays into 3D animation. So here we have a 3D animated car. And it's kind of choppy right now. I'm guessing that's because I'm recording the screen or it's still loading. But kind of notice the lines of the car. So right now we have a line up here, a line down here, and a line down here. We have these lines and they're kind of parallel to each other. And then we have lines going this direction and this direction and this direction and this direction. So these lines kind of make up the form. Depending on what angle you look at the car, depends on, so since we're looking kind of straight at the car, let me do it this way. If you're looking straight at the car, what ends up happening with these lines of the car is they start to go inward. You start to have a horizon back here, and the lines are going towards the horizon. So you know this is the front end of the car, you know the back end is back there. If you were to look at it this way, you would know that the lines get smaller as they go back. This is the type of drawing form that we're going to be talking about, is how we use these lines to create form, especially when it comes to them being 3D objects. How do we draw this? How do we paint it? How do we make it so the eye picks up on it? Because all this is tricking the human eye. We interpret all of this information and we say that's a car, and we're looking at it from its right side, and we can see the front, but we can't see the back because this is where we're standing and this is where we're looking. This is what our brain does. You can even see that this 3D animation has also created itself a light source. So the light source is over here somewhere, and it's creating a shadow, and that's creating shadow and depth and highlights onto the car. We'll probably come back to this car example as we move on, but I'm going to get into the presentation here. This is usually when I pull out my puppy to entertain. All right, so we're talking about form and volume. So drawing 101, how to draw form and volume. Drawing is an art of illusion. Flat lines on a flat sheet of paper looks like something real, something full of depth. To achieve this art effect, artists use special tricks and in this lesson, I'll show you these tricks, giving you the key to drawing three-dimensional objects, and we'll do this with the help of this cute tiger salamander that was created by Jared Davidson. So here we have a salamander. This is actually an illustration. It looks very real. It looks like a real slimy salamander that has been put on the table. Now, we haven't started into color, but we have sort of the same elements here. We have shadow, we have dark spots here, we have highlights on it, and it makes its skin look very, very real. It looks like we can reach out and touch it. This, of course, started with a basic contour or line drawing. Most art starts this way, but we don't have a lot of depth. It doesn't look very real to us to have the salamander just look this way. In fact, we could look at this and say, well, this could be any kind of lizard because we don't have a lot of information. We don't have that kind of glistening skin that the salamander has, and we don't have the stripes that he had on there to let us know what kind of salamander it is. So the next step is that we have the contour drawing, that we have cross contour drawing, where we've created the patchwork, the wire frame of the creature. So we figured out, like, this is the line that's going to go down his back, and this is the line here, and we use these lines to create the form of the salamander. So these cross contour lines are going around, kind of in the shape of the salamander's body, and the shape of its legs, and the shape of its fingers. We have them going lengthways down his bodies. And between these two lines, by it getting fat, we know that his body gets fat right here. Our brain is able to interpret that information. Then we begin to add the skin texture, the color, the shadow, and highlights. We begin to add the elements that make him stand out. Now, this may look gruesome, but a 3D object has to be broken down into its three different sides. So this side, right now what we have are sort of the cross sections that have been cut out. We have this tummy section here, his head section, and down here we have his leg section that's cut out. This is what it looks like in the cross contour. These are the form or shapes of his body. And as you draw an object, it's really important to understand what these are and how they change depending on how you look at them. So you cut the salamander up, and you cut it in half, which is the width, and then you cut it the length, and then you cut it the height. So if you're ever doing a technical drawing, this is kind of what it looks like. If you did a technical drawing of a salamander, would have, this is the front view, or the width, showing the width of it, and then this is the cross section if you were looking at the salamander from the side, and this is the cross section if you were looking at the salamander from above. Generally, with shapes and technical drawings, this is always the same. You have the X and Y axis, and you have the front view, the side view, and the top view. All 3D objects can be broken down into these planes. So a horse has a length, a horse has a height, and a horse has a width. This is pretty much true. And this is going to be different. We're not really counting the legs in this. We're counting generally the shape of the body. If you were to draw a horse, you would generally draw a lot of intersecting ovals, because that's what most organic forms look like. They look like a bunch of intersecting ovals that create the overall form of the horse. I learned how to draw horses by drawing different ovals of different shapes to represent the horse, and then I could move the legs and the neck and the head around, learning how to draw those ovals. So when we're looking at a 3D object like this rectangular prism over here, we're able to understand that this is the front, this is the side, and this is the top. when we draw objects, the way we draw it should also show us that. We should be able to tell this is the top, this is the front, this is the side. And it should also be able to tell us where we're looking from. So over here we have the cross section of the salamander where we're looking at it straight on, or the cross section of a square, or the prism where we're looking straight at it. But when we turn it, we now have the cross section of the salamander has been changed. The orientation of it has been changed. These rounded edges don't look the same. This one is a lot more rounded than this one, and this one is a lot more rounded than this one. And it's the same down here where these lines are straight. Now we have 4 lines that are at an angle, but this top angle matches the bottom, and this side angle matches this side, as well as the X and Y axis. So the next thing that we're going to move into is the rules of perspective. So here we have different views of the salamander, and we have the representation of those views in sort of cube form. Here's the front, the side, and the top. Here's the front, side, and the top. It's all kind of the same. And the more we're able to kind of add this to our drawings, the more our drawings begin to look and our art begins to look 3D. So the way that we look at something is called the cone of vision. So if you are looking up at something, it'll look different than if you're looking down at it, if you're looking to the side, or from a different side. The way that we look at something creates the lines of what we're looking at. So right here, where the eye kind of lines up here, this is kind of our horizon line. This kind of shows us where we're looking, and then we have that's looking above and looking below. So if you're looking at a square object just straight on, then it'll just pretty much look like a square on the sides that it covers. You're able to see the stuff that is within it. You won't be able to see the stuff that's behind it. So if you're looking at a box or an empty room, you would be looking at the front opening of the box and the back of the room, and you'd be able to see the lines going down. So when you look at this, your brain either interprets it as this is looking inside of a box or inside of a room, or this square here is the top, and these are lines going down, and this is some sort of like step or stool that you can stand on. This is how our eyes interpret this information. So I have some drawings here. The first drawing is of the train tracks. So as we look at these train tracks, it looks clearly like we're looking down at them. So we're looking down at the train tracks. One way we know this is that the horizon line is way up here. We can't even see the sky. We can only see the tracks. So we're kind of looking down at the tracks. And we have these lines that to us interpret that these tracks are going way off into the distance. We can't even see where they end. The lines are just going off. But our brains interpret this as distance because these lines are getting smaller, as well as these lines are getting, I don't know if you notice this, getting closer together, the cross sections. We understand that this is getting further away. Looking over here at the skyscraper, we would interpret this as we're looking up at the skyscraper. So down here, the lines are wider, and then they get smaller, which makes it really indicate that this is a super tall skyscraper, because it also seems like it's going to disappear before we can even see the top of it. It just gets so tall that as we look up, so one thing that we can already determine is that for us to have this point of view, we're probably really close to the bottom. We're kind of standing right underneath the building, and we're looking up and we're seeing it this way. It looks really intense. So this is all information our brain has stored in it because of the way that we just look at things and how we interpret that information. So if you wanted to draw a building that looks really big and intense, you would make it so it looks like the lines are getting smaller as you look up, and they get bigger at the bottom, making it look really tall and foreboding. Then over here we have a table. Now this table, we can see the top and we can't see the bottom. So we know that we must be looking down. We're looking down at the table, but we're not just seeing one flat line, which means that we're looking at it from an angle. And because of that, the table forms this diamond shape where this line is parallel to that line and this line is parallel to that line. That's how we know. And we also have this really handy parallel line in the background, which is the wall line. Then down here we have this funky looking van. Now we look at this van, we have to say, can I see the bottom? I can't see the bottom. Can I see the top? I can see a little bit of the top. So I'm looking down at this. I'm looking down at it, and then we have parallel lines here. And we have lines going across here. All of these lines kind of go at the same angle, letting us know that this vehicle is, we're kind of looking at it from the side. Interestingly enough, if you were to measure, you would know that the distance between here in the front and the distance between here in the back is actually longer. Your brain knows that it's the same height, but what's happening is that because it's farther away, perspective is making it get narrower as it goes back. It doesn't go back very far. Now, if you were to get really close to this vehicle and look down the side, these lines would start to get closer together a lot faster, kind of like our building. So the way you look at something creates all of the difference. Again, this is looking straight on at an object versus looking at it where it's at an angle. The lines of the square are always parallel. Drawing circles at an angle or the organic shapes is kind of hard. I would not start here. This is not really where you want to start. It's a good place to practice, but I probably am not going to tell you go out and for this assignment, I don't want you to go out and like draw an animal or a stuffy or something like that. That's going to be pretty hard to draw. Again, here we have just a slight variation. These down here almost look identical, except one is wider than the other. What's happening is that this one you're looking straight at, this one is turned on its side. So when you're looking at it, this, even though it's the same object, it's not as wide because of how we're looking at it. But we're not looking down at it at all. We're looking straight at it. So the horizon line is right there. So it keeps its shape. Then we have this one that we're looking down at ever so slightly because we can see the top. Because of that, we have angles now to everything. So the circle has an angle with its xy, the hexagon has an angle with its xy, and the cube has an angle with its xy. So these have to be drawn at the same angle, and the sides have to be drawn at the same angle. Same here. You have to work out those sides. So interesting enough, when you draw a shape like this on its side, and this is kind of a good way to learn how to do ellipses, is that this side here and this side here is longer than these two sides. Now they're both, this side and this side is the same length, but these two sides are longer. And our eyes do this, figure it out, but we'll also look at it and know that really they're all the same size lines. It's just that because it's at an angle, these end up being shorter than these. And it's the same with the circle. This is actually a longer line in these two sections, and this is actually a shorter line in these two sections. If you stop looking at it as a circle on its side, you'll see that it's actually just an oval with an X through it. But this plays into organic elements all the same. If you're drawing faces, if they're human faces or animal faces, they have these lines of symmetry that either line up or they don't. So if you've ever drawn a face and you looked at it and you said, why does this look weird? This is probably one of the reasons. So usually if you're drawing a face straight on, you would draw a line right down the middle, right down the middle of the face, and then you would draw lines lining up the eyes, lining up the nose, lining up the mouth. But you would make sure that if it was straight on, those would all be symmetrical. Now what's hard is if that the face begins to turn, you're trying to keep that symmetry and also trying to keep it so it looks correct. And this has to do with learning how to draw the form. So as this lion heads turn, notice that these angles all are exactly the same. The distance gets longer or shorter depending on it, but the angle remains the same. If they had these lines at different angles, this lion's head would look a little weird. The same with this one. If this mouth was going at this angle and then the nose was going at a different angle, the lion's head would look really weird. So as we draw things, figuring out how to draw it in 3D by finding those elements of form and conveying those on paper is really, really important. And this gets back to our characters. The number one way that this really plays into especially modern art is that usually if you draw a character that's a still life, you're drawing just someone sitting on a stool and you just capture exactly what you see. But when it's a character that moves from scene to scene doing different things, but you want it to look like the same character, you usually have to flesh out what is the form of that character. How does that character look no matter what angle they're at? And usually you have to do this by mapping out the form of that character. So you'll have to figure out this is the shape of his head, and his eyes kind of go back this way and this way. This is what happens when the shape of his face as his head turns. And this is where it gets really involved. The more the character is involved, the more the drawings and the form of that character get involved. And if you go and look at old 2D animations, especially where they're really drawing out the characters one at a time, they really have to get this down to an art. Bugs Bunny is a series of circles put together and squares and rectangles. All of the elements out there are just these forms that are put together to create a character, and they have lines of symmetry. In fact, in this character, even though it's kind of a 2D drawing of a character, they've created a frame which is usually used in a 3D character. Most 3D characters will have this frame. Now 3D animation is different, that once you've created the form of the character, you just move it around kind of like it's a doll, and then you do animation that way. 2D animation is the one where you really had to draw each person exactly, no matter what angle you were looking at them or what they were doing. So I want to get back, just kind of go back to our car to talk about this a little bit more, and then I'll end the video for us. So here we have our car again. And so if we're looking at it, let me zoom in so we can really do. So I'm going to zoom into our car. So our point of view is from like this lower corner here. We're looking from the lower corner of the passenger side bumper. So in this angle, what's happening with the lines is that the lines are starting out wide down here and are getting smaller going to the back. And this line up here is kind of joining them. So back here is our sort of our disappearing spot, our horizon line, and the lines are all kind of lining up with that disappearing spot. And then we have the tires. The tires kind of keep their form here, but here we have this ellipse showing the shape of the tire depending on the angle that we're looking at it. Now, when we look at objects, our brains automatically does this. If you look at a drawing that doesn't look right, what you're usually noticing is this kind of stuff, where this stuff hasn't been drawn out very well, and the ellipses don't match up with these lines, and your brain the illusion starts to break. It's no longer the magic that it once was, because it doesn't all come together anymore. Let's see here. Now, if we're looking just straight at it from the side, straight at the car, let me zoom out. What ends up happening is that the width of the lines stays predominantly the same. What happens with the tires, though, is because these tires are further away and we're looking straight at it, our horizon line is going back this way. You can kind of see it in the roof of this car. The horizon line is pointing this way. So we move these tires up so we can actually see them. The tires are now actually in our view because of the way that this car is situated. So the way you look at an object really manipulates how you draw it or how you paint it. And this is used a lot in animation and other areas, comic books, where you have an overhead look. If you have Spider-Man jumping through the city and you're looking at him from the front view or you're looking at him from above, all of these things create a different way that you're looking now at the form. So tomorrow I'm going to introduce the exercises that you guys are going to be doing. You're going to be doing less drawings, but they're going to be a little bit more intensive. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Please submit your work if you have any missing work. This is a one semester art class where you get one fine art credit towards graduation. If you fail this class, you still have to get a fine art credit, and then you have to get your GPA up. You don't I'm basically expecting a few drawings from you per week to get through this class. So you guys can do it. I don't expect like perfect work. I want you to just have the key elements of the actual exercise involved, and then you'll get a good grade. All right, I will see you guys tomorrow.